Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We have a special guest on the phone lines right now, Congresswoman Karen Bass. Welcome.
Good morning.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
How you feeling this morning?
I am feeling pretty good, except for I'm very worried about the fact that today is the last day for people to, well, actually their unemployment runs out. The unemployment runs out and the $600 supplement runs out for no good reason.
Damn. What is the reason for that? Why didn't they extend it?
Well, you know, in the House, we voted I think it's over 70 days ago. We voted to extend it. We sent the bill over to the Senate, but you know, over in the Senate, in my opinion, the only thing they care about is confirming right-wing judges who are going to be judges for the next 40 years. They're obsessed behind the $600 payment, but they don't give a darn about the millions and billions of dollars that were in the first package that is for big business that they don't even want to disclose where that money is going. But they're worried about $600. And what they say is that if you give the $600, then people won't want to go back to work. So they want to make people go back to work, right? So let's take away their $600. They want to reduce it to $200. And I think that's just flat out cruel. I don't know any other way to describe it. People don't have the jobs to go back to.
I agree with that. And we also talk about how dangerous it is because we're also right now debating whether or not kids should be going back to school. Should schools be opening back up? And it's still not safe. We're still seeing some really high numbers. And so if you're telling people it's not safe, it's dangerous, and people are suffering right now, people have family members to worry about and take care of, then how can you tell people you have to go back to work?
You know, honestly, before George Floyd was killed, I was just completely obsessed behind this virus because, I mean, right now, 154,000 people are dead, and they didn't have to die. They died because we have a president who really doesn't care and thinks denial is the way to deal with this. So we don't know how many of those 154 look like us, but we know it's a significant percentage. So the reason why I was obsessed was because when it came out that 70% of the people that died in Chicago were Black, 80% of the people that died in Alabama were Black, 70% in New Orleans, and we weren't doing anything. And every time they talked about it, they wanted to talk about the fact that, well, Black folks have high blood pressure, Black folks have diabetes, Black folks are fat. And to me, I don't want to hear about our underlying health conditions. That's an issue. But right now, the house is on fire, so send a fire engine. And then after the fire is out, then we can talk about diabetes and high blood pressure. To me, every time somebody raised that, that was just an excuse not to do anything.
Hey, by the way, though, even that is systemic racism's fault. Even that is the government's fault. All those underlying health conditions.
Totally. You know, I spent a number of years working in healthcare, and I worked in the emergency room in LA County. That's one of the largest emergency rooms in the country. I worked in the trauma center. And so I saw that up close. I also worked right at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. So this reminds me of that. You know, we didn't have any protective gear at that time. We didn't know how the virus was spread, and we were scared to death every day we went to work. And so I can empathize with the healthcare workers. But when the book is written on this a couple of years from now, I mean, these people just didn't need to die. And they don't want to give us the demographics, because if they gave us the demographics, out of that 154,000, a huge percentage of it would be Black, Brown, Pacific Islanders, and Native Americans. So here we work across our caucuses. You know, obviously there's the Black caucus, there's the Latino caucus, the Asian Pacific Islander caucus, and then we have 2 Native American women. And so we've been working together to try to get the resources for targeted intervention. So right now, they just want to treat everybody the same. But again, if you have a crisis, you send in the troops to that crisis. So we've been fighting to get the resources so that we could have massive testing, massive tracing, and early treatment. And I know from working in healthcare that one of the reasons why we're dying is because we're sent home. We're not given the care. And now that the ICUs are filling up, they're making decisions about who has the best chance to live.
Wow.
And if you don't have a good chance to live, you're sent on your way. And I think that's criminal. So we couldn't get the government to act fast enough. So we've been looking for resources from foundations, from corporations to go and do targeted intervention where the death rate is so high.
Let's talk about some things, Ms. Bass. You were the House lead on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. A lot of people may not even know, that there was an act. Can you walk us through a little bit of that bill and tell us what's in it?
Sure. It does several things. One of the problems that we've always had in our communities is that it is hard to fire a police officer, to sue a police officer, or to prosecute a police officer. So we made those corrections. Like when that criminal was killing George Floyd, everybody watched him die.
Right.
He was looking at the camera. He was looking at the camera and he had his hand in his pocket because he didn't give it to him because he felt he had complete impunity. Why? Because police officers basically have immunity. It's called qualified immunity. The other thing is that it's almost impossible to prosecute a police officer, which is why you see them occasionally get arrested, but then they don't get prosecuted, right? Well, they don't get prosecuted because the standard is you have to say that they willfully, you know what was in their mind, they willfully intended to kill somebody. Well, we lowered that standard to say reckless. That doesn't matter whether you intended to kill somebody or not if you're reckless. And so that's one part of the bill. The other part of the bill is to have a registry where if you're a bad officer, you shouldn't be able to go to another department because that's what happens. You go from department to department. Tamir Rice, 12-year-old child, was killed within seconds when that officer got out of the car. Well, he had just been fired from a nearby department because they thought he was unstable and they thought he had a propensity for violence. So he lied, and the police chief that hired him didn't know that. So we want to have a national registry where bad officers could be documented and then they wouldn't be hired. Breonna Taylor died because of that no-knock warrant, right? The guy they were looking for was already in jail. So we banned no-knock warrants. We ban chokeholds. So the other thing that we do is we try to raise the standards of what it takes to be a police officer. So why is it that the person that does your hair have to have a license and be accredited, and there's some national standards, but the guy that carries a gun doesn't have to have any standards at all, which is why a chokehold is illegal in one area and legal in another area. So banning chokeholds, but also raising the standards so that police departments have to be accredited. So another part of the bill that I like, one of the pieces that I like the best, is the piece that provides grants for communities to re-envision what public safety is like in their communities. So, we can go into that if you want to, but
is that kind of like defunding the police, where you talk about defunding the police because we're taking money to other programs? So what are your thoughts on that? I guess you're about to break that down.
So, yeah, let me break that down in a second. The grants are not taking away, that's new money. So that's new money that a community can apply for that goes to community-based organizations so they could look in their communities and say, well, what do our communities need to be safe? So what I think, I say it a little different. I say, instead of saying defund the police, I say refund the communities. Because the fact of the matter is, and I started working on this 30 years ago in South Central. I started an organization at the height of the crack cocaine crisis and the Crips and the Bloods. We had 1,000 homicides that year in LA. And I started the organization because, in my opinion, crack was a health issue and it was an economic issue because that's why people were trafficking, because all of the good jobs had gone away, and it was a social issue. So around about 30 years ago, we started criminalizing health issues and economic issues. Why? Because we cut money from cities, we cut money from programs, we cut money from drug treatment. And so we need to restore that. In LA, for example, we have this jail we call Twin Towers. And Twin Towers, we say, is the most expensive mental health institution in the country. So what has happened in our country is we have taken funding away from communities, but we have no problem putting all the money in police, jails, and prisons. And then when society has problems like mental illness, we criminalize it. So I'm not saying that if somebody is mentally ill and they're violent, you send in a social worker. But what I say is that if you treated the person to begin with, they wouldn't have been destabilized and become violent. But
Right.
years before, actually the 90s, we had the bright idea of closing mental hospitals. That was a good idea because the mental hospitals were really horrible. But we had made a commitment that we would build community-based mental health centers, and we never did that. So we just shut down the hospitals and threw people out on the street. And so in LA, for example, in LA City, on any given night, we have 40,000 people sleeping on the street. Now, obviously not all of them are mentally ill. A mental illness is a percentage. The main reason people are on the street is because LA is very expensive to live in and they can't afford housing. And by the way, because people's unemployment insurance is not going to be continued today, you're going to have massive evictions also.
That's right.
Because in addition to the unemployment insurance, with COVID, we also had a moratorium on evictions and we were providing rental assistance. So once again, we allow a social and an economic problem to get out of control. Now, what do you think is going to happen? The
Crime's going to rise.
You guys got me. You got me on my on my soapbox because
Let's go.
the other thing that was driving me crazy about COVID was prisons. So I've worked on criminal justice reform for several decades. Number one, trying to prevent 3 strikes and a number of laws that were being passed. But here you have, everybody seemed to understand nursing homes, but nobody understood prisons. So people are going to die and not going to die. They have been dying in prison. So what we did in the Congressional Black Caucus, we did a series of town halls with people whose family members were incarcerated to talk about the issue. The town halls that we did, obviously were open to the public. And it was so impactful that we did one the following week with Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Hoyer, to talk about this issue because I wanted the leaders to hear what was going on. And so then we put in one of the bills for the Bureau of Prisons to let people out. So, of course, they're coming up with reasons not to let people out. Now, they let Michael Cohen out and said he had some health reason. Now, that guy has a health issue, right? So we've been working on individual cases and getting people out. But here's my concern. I don't want people to just come out. When they've been in a prison, they're liable to have been exposed to COVID, and then you're going to send them home to the zip codes that have the disproportionate death rate. So what we're arguing for is test them before they leave, treat them before they leave if they have COVID, isolate them for a number of weeks before they get out so we can be sure they're COVID free. There have been examples of people who have gotten out of prison and dropped dead a week later. Now, That's just great. They go home, they infect their families, and then they drop dead. So this is hitting us so many ways, and it kind of reminds me like I was obsessed about crack because I felt like it was going to wipe out the Black population when it was happening. Because at the same time as we had the crack epidemic, we also had the AIDS epidemic. Now we have COVID, and it's having all of this disproportionate impact. And you have a president who has basically said, well, the people that are dying, they're older, they have all these health issues. And guess what? How old do you think these people are? There's a very small percentage of people below the age of 18 who died of COVID, which means that everybody that's dying of COVID are also of voting age. So the Black Caucus, I'm sorry.
No, I want to salute you because you took one question about police reform and covered everything in the ecosystem. From prison reform to COVID, everything. But
the funding, the refund, all that.
I do want to ask you, because clearly the George Floyd bill clearly makes it easier for law enforcement to be held accountable. Why did police reform in DC fall apart? Like,
I'm sorry,
why
did it
won't,
fall
why,
apart?
yeah, why won't it get done this year? Why won't the Justice and Policing Act get done this year?
Well, I'm not convinced it won't. I have not given up, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
First of all, we passed it out of the House. And by the way, getting all the Democrats to vote for a bill like this was no small measure. The reason why everybody voted for it was because of those hundreds of thousands of people out on the street every day in every state in the country, people around the world. Did you hear about the African countries? All 54 African countries went to the United Nations to complain about racism in the United States. So we passed it out the House, all the Democrats, 3 Republicans. It's in the Senate, and you know that there's a Senate bill, right? So ever since we passed the bill, conversations are still happening. If they come up with another bill in the Senate and they pass it out of the Senate, that could throw us into a conference. So I have not given up at all. Now, basically, the answer to your question, though, is that the reason why it's stalled is because the Senate doesn't do nothing except for confirm judges.
The reason why everything gets stalled. Now, Karen Bass, I wanted to talk to you also. Obviously, we know by now that you are a potential VP pick for Joe Biden. And let's talk about your activism and how we've gotten to this point where you are here today, because I know you didn't want to start off even doing politics when you were younger. You were more of a community activist. So I just want to talk about the time period that we're in, you being a potential VP, and why you think you would be a good pick.
Well, a couple of things. I, by the way, view politics differently. So to me, all of what I was doing since I was a kid was politics. I think that elected office is just one branch. That's all. So my work in the community, the issues I was working on are the same issues I'm working on inside of Congress. And so I think because of the historical period we're in, where we have had a president who has been openly racist for 3.5 years, has tried to do everything he could to divide us. To me, with George Floyd and policing on the table, it's also raised the issue for the first time that I can remember where people are talking about systemic racism. I mean, we were talking about that for decades and it was something radical, but now people are actually talking about it. And so I think that my years of activism, which has been several decades now, my years of activism in this particular historical moment could allow me to be the branch, the bridge to the activism that is happening in the streets that could help bring us together. In addition, I think because of my years of activism and I'm just dead set on getting stuff done, I also have been able to work with Republicans, some of the most conservative, some of the most flag-waving Trumpsters. If we are working on an issue that's helping our people, because one of the other issues I work on is the foster care issue, which to me is the driver for the criminal justice system. Because when we throw these kids to the curb when they're 18, so many of them wind up incarcerated. And I work with Republicans on that issue. I'm working with Republicans on policing right now. So VP, to me, it doesn't matter. What matters to me is that I believe this election is literally a question of life and death because we are dying. And so I'm willing to do whatever it takes in whatever role because I don't want our people to keep dying. And 4 more years of this, we will be fundamentally changed. I mean, we're already changed as a country, but this dude is using the playbook from George Wallace in the 1960s. He's running that same kind of campaign. And I just feel our lives are at risk on so many levels, whether it's COVID or whether it's right-wing terrorism, I feel we're at risk.
Ms. Bass, you just said it doesn't matter to you if you become vice president. Now, do you really mean that?
Well, it doesn't matter to me what role I'm asked to serve in. You know,
she's still doing the work.
You know, I can't go into much about the vice president thing, but I have always focused on the work, period. I didn't set out to be an elected official. Otherwise, I probably would have done some things very different in my life. My life has been devoted to fighting for social and economic justice since I was a kid, and that journey has led me in many different directions. I just happen to be sitting on the inside of this institution now. But if I wasn't on the inside of this institution, I'd be right out there on the streets doing the same thing I've been doing for decades.
Well,
You know
why
what
do
I
you
really
think your
wanted to
name,
ask you about? Also, just along those lines, though, just now that your name has come up, right? I see a lot of the Republicans have been attacking you and questioning your credibility on things and questioning things that you've done in the past, which has to be different for you because you've been working so diligently all these decades, like you said, for our community. But now there's all these attacks. So what has that been like for you? And what are some of the things that you would like to clear up that are narratives that are being put out there?
Oh, I'm used to being attacked. There's nothing new about that. If you challenge the system, as I did as a teenager, if you challenge the system, you're going to pay for it, and there are going to be consequences. So I went through a number of years, which, you know, I mean, I've said this a lot of places, but when I went to George Floyd's memorial and I looked up and I saw the year he was born, 1973, that was 47 years ago. That was when I first started working on police abuse. Why? Because I was undergoing tremendous police harassment. You guys know COINTELPRO. Well, COINTELPRO Jr. was done by our chief of police, Daryl Gates, who harassed us for years. So I'm used to attacks. That doesn't bother me. I keep my eyes on the prize. My life has been devoted to fighting for people, and I'll take what comes.
Why, how important is it to you that Vice President Biden picks a Black woman, whether it's you or not?
Well, I mean, I think that I would obviously love to see that happen. And I think that the African-American women that are under consideration are all dynamite and would all be fantastic. I just think, you know, for all of the years that Black women have held up the party, the idea of having a Black woman on the ticket sends the right message. Now, at the end of the day, we got to get rid of the sucker. I mean, we got 96 days to go.
Right.
And I want to see that happen first and foremost. But I think if there was a Black woman on the ticket, I think that would help galvanize the Black community. I think that would be very exciting.
It's not a think, it's a will. Okay. Now, what did you think about the political article? The political article that called you the anti-Kamala? Because I've never seen them do that with white women. I've never seen Amy Klobuchar described as the anti-Elizabeth Warren. So what do you think of that?
Well, my response was, why are you comparing me with her? Why don't you compare Whitman with Warren? So you might have seen that right after I woke up and saw that article, we tweeted out right away, don't do that. Kamala Harris is my friend. We're from the same state. We've known each other since she was the DA of San Francisco. When she was the DA of San Francisco, I was the Speaker of the House in California. We have worked together on criminal justice reform and a lot of issues. And her candidacy for president was historic. I mean, you had Shirley Chisholm, and that was viewed, you know, during those years as kind of a symbolic campaign. Her campaign was not a symbolic campaign. Her campaign was a righteous campaign. She was a viable candidate, and she made history with that candidacy. Mm-hmm. And so don't call me the anti-Kamala. And I said that, and the two of us talked about it the other day.
Now, I want to ask you about Joe Biden also. He's had some...
hold on, you said you and Kamala spoke about that the other day. How was that conversation?
It was good. She said, we ain't doing that. Mm-hmm. It was fine.
All right,
we actually spoke at Mr. Lewis's memorial service on the Hill.
Now, I wanted to ask you about Joe Biden. He's made some missteps on his campaign so far. So what are some things that you think he needs to do besides his VP pick to make sure that our people are supporting Joe Biden more and energized to go out and vote for him, not just because he's not Trump?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I think is so challenging is the way we have to do this now. You know what I mean? Because, see, I think one of the things about Biden that is really important in this time period, I truly believe that he is authentic, that he cares about people. I really do believe that. And frankly, after 3.5 years of somebody, I mean, the role of commander-in-chief is to take care of your people. When you let 154,000 of your people die, you don't take care of them. And I do think that he has genuine empathy. I think he genuinely cares about people. And I think that authenticity is going to be extremely difficult on a screen. And so I am hoping that in some kind of way, we can figure out how to have that human interaction, but have it safely. And then I think him, committing to the policies that he's talking about now, that are policies that are really important for our folks. And the number one policy, the number one thing has to be COVID. We can't get a hold of the economy. And I think him going out and talking about how he's going to be able to prevent people from dying. And one of the things that I think he can and should talk about is Ebola. You remember Ebola? Ebola could have been a pandemic.
Okay.
He was able, because Ebola could have been a horrific pandemic. And Obama and Biden stopped that. Why did they stop it and how did they stop it? It's because we were respected around the world at that time. And they were able to galvanize the world to stop it, and it didn't even spread in Africa. And I think he could use that as an example of what he participated in and how he could use some of those same strategies to get a handle on COVID.
Ms. Bass, we know the CBC has a lot of loyalty to Joe Biden. How can we trust the CBC to push Biden on racial issues like policing and reparations, just race-specific policies that help Black people? Like, is it hard to push someone when they're a friend like Biden is to you?
No, but here's the difference. What I don't think you'll see the CBC doing is necessarily pushing, and I don't think you'll necessarily see the CBC pushing him in public and calling him out in public. Now, what happens in the room, I think the push will be hard, but I actually, at this point in time, don't believe there needs to be a push. Now, when he becomes president, there'll absolutely be things that you have to push him on, like anybody, because when you are president, or even when you're a member of Congress, there's 9 million issues to deal with. That's why you always have to have people outside of government pushing. And in this instance, it would be the CDC outside of the White House pushing the White House. And so I think a lot of the policies that are important to our people, he's already agreed to. The question will be pushing the implementation.
Now, I was going to ask about, they always talk about our community and how difficult it is for us to receive loans. And I'm seeing it even now. Like, you look at the amount of people that's getting these PPP loans and these big corporations. Our small business owners are still hurting at alarming rates. So what do we do to turn that around?
Well, I think there has to be very specific programs. Anytime you have a situation where you want to treat everything equal and you have a population that has very specific needs, we always lose out. Right. It has to be targeted and it has to be specific.
Now, Kanye West, does he scare you at all?
Oh, shut up.
With him running?
We're not doing that.
Hold on, I got a question for it, but I got a question. Now, do you think with him doing that what's the word I'm looking for? It makes things difficult for people out there, because some people might really say, okay, I'm going to vote for him. Do you find that being difficult and a distraction? That's the word I'm looking for.
No, and for a very practical reason. It's kind of late to get on the ballot.
It's not even real. Listen, Ms. Bass, as a Black person, right? I want to go back to the VP thing for a second. Well, not really the VP thing, but talking about Senator Harris. As a Black person, a Black woman, when you hear things like Senator Harris has no remorse for what she did to Joe Biden in the debates, or she's not loyal, she's too ambitious, she really wants to be president. What do you think that's code for?
Well, I mean, that's, aside from racial code, it's gender code. I mean, we both experienced that. I remember when she was DA in San Francisco and I was speaker, people wondered whether or not I would have the capacity to deal with it. And I remember her being attacked because she had a specific position on the death penalty. And it was like 5 minutes after she got elected, they were trying to go after her because a police officer got killed and she would not call for the death penalty. So then, she's weak, she's a woman, so I think it's racial and gender code. I think it's primarily gender. But I think, the two of us are very used to that. I think we,
Brush it off.
Yeah, why does she have to have remorse? Like, I don't understand why people are upset about her calling out Biden's record. Like, if we're going against Trump, shouldn't we want somebody who's not afraid to stand up to old white men?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I don't know. I think that, I think Kamala has been doing just fine. I think she needs to keep doing what she's doing.
Are you concerned about the voting process and voter suppression
Yes.
and what's going to happen in the upcoming election? And what can we do?
Yes, I'm terrified about it. And let me tell you why. Because now, I mean, they've always done voter suppression, right? But now they're making people risk their lives to vote. I mean, what happened in Wisconsin? People went out, they made them line up, and 50 people caught COVID. So now, one of the things that the Republicans have always used is mail-in voting. That's always been their strategy. Our strategy has been door knocking. So now that we want to use mail-in vote to keep people safe, people should be able to vote from home. Now they don't want to have it happen. So the Black Caucus, we did this posting where we said the ultimate voter suppression, and we had a picture of a coffin. Because, like I said, we don't know how many of those 154,000 are Black and brown, right? Mm-hmm. But they were all of voting age. And so I worry that they're going to make people risk their lives in order to vote. And that's what we have to fight. But here's the thing. When we organize, when we get mad because they don't want us to vote, we tend to want to vote more. When we organize, we win.
Now, you spoke about earlier the impact of the crack epidemic, right? And we're seeing our community getting affected so much by COVID and coronavirus. And what's happening now is a lot of times that, you know, we don't know if we should be bringing our kids to school now when school starts in August, September. But you also do know that it's going to be more difficult for our community's kids to learn more because, you know, sometimes we don't have computers. We can't learn virtually. So how do we help those problems? Because we're going to be even further behind when it comes to education.
I mean, again, it's one of those other topics I obsess about because we already have the achievement gap. And that achievement gap is going to get so wide. I mean, even in a place like Los Angeles, where people do have access to technology and computers are passed out when they don't have them, maybe not in all the schools, but most of the schools. Mm-hmm. That assumes that the kid knows how to use a computer. And does the 6-year-old know how to use a computer? And what about the person whose parent works 3 jobs and can't sit there with the kid? And so what we're doing in LA is something that I think should happen nationwide, which is they're using the television. Because, you know, even if you don't have a computer, you do have a television, and doing some learning that way. When we are past the worst part of this pandemic, we are going to have specific targeted programming, not general programming, specific programming that goes in and assesses how the achievement gap is widened and figure out how we intensely provide the resources to close it.
Ms. Bass, I know you probably got to go, man. So I got like 2 more questions for you. Really 1, I guess. But whose idea was it to let all those white people dress like they was going to the Black Panther premiere? Like, why did y'all have white condo on the hill, Kente cloth and taking the knee? That was your idea?
Yep.
Why?
Well, let me just tell you. You know, last year, in the 400th anniversary of our arrival here, we took a trip to Africa. Speaker Pelosi led that trip. The president of Ghana gave her Kente. What we have been doing in the Black Caucus for the last several years is we have worn Kente at different ceremonial events. And so for us to wear Kente at a historic introduction of a policing bill that has never happened before, a bill that was composed of bills that the Black Caucus members had been working on for years, we wore Kente. She wore hers. She had been given it by the president of Ghana. Now, I was a little issue when the Black Caucus members had it, and then the white members that were there in solidarity, it was kind of hard to say, well, you can't have it. And so that's why that happened. Now, I know it blew up on Black Twitter, and I know we got a donkey. You gave me a donkey. I saw that donkey.
It was more so for white condo. It was more so for white conduct. Because I think the critique for me was I didn't care about the symbolism. I cared more about the substance of the bill y'all were passing. You know, that's what we want. We want actual legislation. I don't care about the song and the dance.
Right. But listen, if I do something that's a problem, I take responsibility. And I know that people saw that as a problem. I didn't. I mean, Africa is one of the main reasons why I'm here. I chair the Africa subcommittee. One of my big focuses, aside from dealing with the issues of Black people here, is dealing with our relationship on the continent. And one thing that I've tried to do is to try to build our ties and to try to educate people about US-Africa relations. So when it is a memorial service, like for Elijah Cummings, when we go to the State of the Union to kind of, make our point across to the president that referred to African countries as shithole countries, we display our African roots with pride. And that's what that was about.
Because it probably pisses them off. I get it. So when you going to teach Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer how to do the electric slide? You
know what? Nancy Pelosi knows how to do the electric slide.
I don't believe you. Now you're going too far. I don't believe you. I don't.
Yes.
When has she done the electric slide? When?
Every time we have a caucus retreat in the evening.
Put it on Instagram or it didn't happen. Put it on Instagram or it didn't happen.
I'm gonna tell her that. I'm gonna tell her we're gonna take a picture of her the next time.
What about the cha-cha? What about the cha-cha slide though?
I don't know about that. But I know about the electric slide because I seen it.
What about the crip walk? You from Cali now. What about the crip walk?
Oh my goodness.
I can't do it.
Whoa. You know how to,
did you just claim a set?
I didn't say I knew how to do it.
You said you know about it. Yeah.
Well, great talking to you, Ms. Bass. And if you become the vice president, I don't think I would be mad at that at all.
Thank you for having me on. I've wanted to do this show for a long time, so it's great talking to you.
We appreciate you and the work that you have been doing and will continue to do. So thank you.
All right. It's Congresswoman Karen Bass. It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.